Welcome back, everybody. Today we're diving into one of the wildest financial scandals in recent memory. The rise and fall of Wirecard.
Yeah, this one's got it all.
Seriously. Missing billions shady figures and a level of deception that's almost hard to believe. We've got court documents, articles, and even a book by Dan McCrum, the journalist, who really blew the lid off of this whole thing.
It's a wild ride.
So to help us make sense of all this, I've got an expert here with me today. So looking at the whole Wirecard saga, what really jumps out at you?
Well, it's incredible how this company that started out processing payments for, shall we say, less than reputable corners of the internet,
Right.
managed to somehow become a darling of the German stock market. And they even joined the elite DAX 30 index.
Okay, so let's rewind back to those early days. I'm curious about Wirecard's initial business model. What was it about it that maybe, set the stage for what was to come?
So Wirecard started back in the late 90s, processing payments for online gambling and adult entertainment sites, businesses that a lot of traditional banks, they didn't really want to touch. Yeah.
So this gave Wirecard kind of a niche, but it also meant that they were operating in this world with a lot less oversight. Where pushing the boundaries was almost kind of expected.
Yeah.
So they were already comfortable operating in the shadows. But they clearly had ambitions beyond just processing payments for, well, what we're just talking about.
Oh, absolutely. Marcus Braun, Wirecard's CEO, he was a charismatic figure, really sold this vision of Wirecard as this tech innovator, a disruptor in the world of digital payments. And he managed to attract a ton of investors and really paint this picture of incredible growth.
And for a while, that picture seemed to be becoming reality, right? I mean, they were growing rapidly, acquiring other companies, and their stock was just on fire.
Right, and that's where their inclusion in the DAX 30 really becomes crucial. Joining that index wasn't just about prestige. It meant that these major institutional investors were almost obligated to buy their stock.
Oh, wow.
Which, of course, drove up their valuation and gave them this air of legitimacy.
So it was like a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more their stock rose, the more trustworthy they seemed, and it just attracted even more investors.
Yeah.
But how did they actually pull this off? How did they create the illusion of this massive success?
Right. So what was the nature of the fraud itself?
Yeah.
So at the heart of it was their third-party acquiring business. Basically, Wirecard claimed to be processing billions of euros in payments for all these partner merchants, mostly in high-risk, high-growth markets like Southeast Asia.
Okay. And this is where those obscure accounting practices came in.
Exactly. So the details get pretty complex, but essentially they were creating fake transactions and phantom merchants to inflate their revenue and their profits.
Wait, they were just making up numbers, just completely fabricating transactions.
Yeah.
How could that possibly work for so long?
That's the baffling part. It was a really sophisticated scheme involving shell companies, obscure partnerships, and all sorts of accounting tricks that were designed to make it incredibly difficult to actually trace the real flow of money.
So who finally started to pull at the threads of this elaborate web of deception?
That's where Dan McCrum and the Financial Times come in. Starting around 2015, they began publishing this series of articles that really started to question Wirecard's accounting practices and the legitimacy of their reported profits.
And I'm guessing Wirecard wasn't too happy about this.
To say the least. They denied everything, launched these huge smear campaigns against the FT, hired private investigators to dig up dirt on McCrum, and they even tried to implicate him in market manipulation schemes.
So this wasn't just white-collar crime anymore. It was getting downright intimidating. But the FT didn't back down.
Not at all. They kept digging, finding more and more evidence of wrongdoing. And as their reporting gained traction, other people started to take notice. Investors began to question Wirecard's story, and regulators who had initially dismissed all the allegations were forced to start taking a closer look.
And I'm assuming that closer look revealed some pretty damning evidence.
Oh, it did. The more they investigated, the more cracks appeared in Wirecard's facade. And what they found was truly shocking. We're talking billions of euros missing, a tangled web of shell companies, and a complete lack of transparency about where all the money was actually going.
Wow. So this wasn't just some accounting error or a slight misrepresentation of their numbers. This was a full-blown orchestrated fraud.
Yeah.
How did it all finally unravel? What was the final straw that brought the whole house of cards down?
Okay, so this is where we get into some truly wild territory. Remember those escrow accounts in the Philippines? The ones that were supposedly holding billions of euros? Well, it turned out they didn't exist.
Wait, they just poof, Vanished.
Pretty much. In June of 2020, Wirecard admitted that the 1.9 billion euros supposedly held in those accounts were simply gone.
Wow.
And with that admission, the game was up.
So they built this entire empire on a foundation of fake money.
Yeah.
And when that foundation crumbled, the whole thing imploded.
Exactly. And that's really just the beginning of the story, because right as all of this was coming to light, something else happened that sent shockwaves through the world. Wirecard's COO, Jan Marsalek, disappeared. And his story is where things get really strange.
Oh, this I have to hear. I'm guessing this isn't just your average executive fleeing the country.
Oh, not even close. Marsalek's disappearance takes this whole saga from a financial thriller into the realm of international espionage.
Okay. I am on the edge of my seat. We've got missing billions, a company imploding, and now a vanishing COO. Where do we even start with Jan Marsalek?
Well, Marsalek is like a character straight out of a spy novel. Just as Wirecard is admitting that 1.9 billion euros have vanished, he boards a private jet and flies to Belarus.
Belarus. That's not exactly your typical vacation destination. What was he doing there?
Well, that's where the intrigue deepens. It turns out Marsalek had cultivated all these connections with intelligence agencies in Austria, Russia, even Libya.
Wait, hold on. Libyan spies. What does this have to do with a payment processing company?
That's the million-euro question, isn't it? The details are still pretty murky. But it seems Marsalek was involved in all sorts of shady dealings, using Wirecard as a cover for his clandestine activities.
So we're not just talking about financial fraud anymore. Are we saying Wirecard itself might have been involved in espionage?
It's hard to say for sure. There's evidence suggesting that Wirecard may have actually benefited from Marsalek's connections, perhaps even enjoying some protection from scrutiny. But the extent of their involvement is still being investigated.
This is mind-blowing. It's like peeling back layers of an onion, and each layer is more unbelievable than the last. What else do we know about Marsalek's connections?
Well, it gets even weirder. There are reports that Marsalek actually boasted about having access to classified information, including, get this, the formula for a Novichok nerve agent.
Novichok.
Yeah.
That's the stuff used in the Salisbury poisonings, right? This is getting more and more surreal.
It is, and it raises all sorts of questions about what Marsalek was really up to and who he was working with. Was he just this rogue operator using Wirecard for his own ends, or was there something more sinister at play?
So we've got this massive financial fraud, a web of shell companies missing billions, and a COO who's vanished into thin air with alleged ties to spies and nerve agents. Where do we even go from here? What happened to Wirecard in the aftermath of all this?
Well, after the missing billions were revealed and Marsalek disappeared, Wirecard's stock price completely collapsed. They filed for insolvency in June 2020, marking one of the biggest corporate collapses in German history.
So this wasn't just a slap on the wrist. This was a complete and utter downfall.
Absolutely. And the fallout was immense. Investors lost billions, employees lost their jobs, and the reputation of the German financial system was severely damaged.
I imagine there were a lot of angry people wanting answers.
Yeah.
What happened to the people involved in the fraud?
Markus Braun, Wirecard's CEO, was arrested and charged with fraud, market manipulation, and breach of trust. He's currently awaiting trial and maintains his innocence.
And what about the other executives? Did anyone else face consequences?
Several other former executives have been charged and are also awaiting trial. But the big question mark, of course, remains over Marsalek's whereabouts. He's still a fugitive, and there are countless theories about where he might be and what he's doing.
It's almost like he vanished off the face of the earth. Do we have any clues about what happened to him?
There have been various sightings reported over the years, but nothing concrete. Some speculate he's in hiding, protected by some powerful figures, while others believe that he might have met a more sinister end.
It's a mystery that continues to fascinate and perplex people all around the world. But beyond the intrigue and the drama, this whole Wirecard saga raises some pretty serious questions, doesn't it? I mean, how could something like this happen in the first place?
You're right. The Wirecard scandal exposed some major flaws in corporate governance, regulatory oversight, and the auditing process.
It's almost unbelievable that a company could operate on such a massive scale of deception for so long without anyone noticing. Where did the system fail?
Well, for starters, Wirecard was able to exploit loopholes in regulations, particularly those governing payments and financial technology. They were also operating in these geographically diverse and complex markets, which made it harder to track their activities.
So they were taking advantage of the complexities of the global financial system to essentially hide in plain sight.
In a way, yes, But there's also the issue of regulatory capture, where regulators become too close to the industries they're supposed to be overseeing.
You mean like becoming blind to potential wrongdoing because of their close relationships with the companies?
Exactly. In the case of Wirecard, there were accusations that German regulators were too cozy with the company, too quick to dismiss the allegations against them.
So it was a combination of regulatory failures, clever exploitation of loopholes, and maybe even some turning a blind eye.
It seems so. And we can't forget the role of the auditors. Ernst & Young, one of the big four accounting firms, audited Wirecard for years and failed to detect the fraud.
How could they miss something of this magnitude?
Well, that's another area where there's been a lot of scrutiny. There are questions about whether they were simply negligent or whether there was something more deliberate at play.
So it's possible they were complicit in the fraud.
That's certainly a possibility that's being investigated. But regardless of the specifics, the Wirecard scandal has raised absolutely, and it highlights the crucial role of investigative journalism in holding powerful institutions accountable and exposing wrongdoing.
Speaking of which, we can't forget the role of Dan McCrum and the Financial Times in bringing this whole thing to light. They faced enormous pressure and intimidation from Wirecard, but refused to back down.
Their relentless pursuit of the truth is a testament to the power of investigative journalism. Without their work, it's likely this fraud would have continued for much longer.
It's a reminder that even in the age of misinformation and fake news, real journalism matters. It can make a difference even when it seems like the forces of deception are too powerful to overcome.
Couldn't have said it better myself. This whole Wirecard saga highlights the crucial role of journalists as watchdogs uncovering the truth, even when it's uncomfortable or dangerous.
It's also a story about courage, persistence, and the belief that facts matter, even when they're inconvenient for those in power.
And that's a message we need to keep in mind, especially in today's world.
I think you've hit on something really important here. This isn't just a story about financial fraud. It's about the erosion of trust, the abuse of power, and the importance of holding those in positions of authority accountable.
You're absolutely right. The Wirecard scandal has shaken people's faith in the financial system and raised questions about who we can trust and how we can protect ourselves from this kind of deception.
So where do we go from here? What are the key takeaways from this whole Wirecard saga?
Well, on a practical level, it highlights the importance of due diligence, critical thinking, and skepticism when it comes to financial investments.
Don't just blindly trust the hype or the promises of outsized returns. Dig deeper, ask questions, and be wary of companies that seem too good to be true.
Wise words. But beyond that, the Wirecard scandal is a stark reminder of the fragility of trust and the corrosive power of greed.
It's a story about how unchecked ambition can lead to devastating consequences, not just for the perpetrators, but for countless innocent victims.
And it's a story that's still unfolding. The full extent of Wirecard's fraud and its impact on the financial system are still being investigated.
So even though the company has collapsed, the saga continues.
Exactly. And there are still many unanswered questions. Where's Jan Marsalek? What was the extent of his involvement in intelligence operations? And how deep does the rot go within the financial system?
These are questions that will continue to be explored as the investigations unfold, and we'll be sure to keep you updated as new information comes to light.
It's going to be fascinating to see where this story goes next.
So we've been talking about the Wirecard scandal,
Yeah.
and it's this really crazy story of ambition, deception, and like a whole web of intrigue that just keeps getting more and more tangled. But with all this drama, it's important to remember that there are real-world consequences to all of this. What's been the impact of Wirecard's collapse, both in Germany and in the rest of the world?
Yeah, I mean, the Wirecard scandal, it really sent shockwaves through the entire global financial system, exposing some serious vulnerabilities in, regulatory oversight and the auditing process. It really underscored how complex and opaque these systems can be, even in these supposedly, well-regulated markets like Germany.
You mentioned earlier that there were criticisms of the German financial regulator, BaFin. Did they face any repercussions in the wake of all of this?
Oh, BaFin definitely came under fire for their handling of the Wirecard case. They were accused of being too slow to react to the allegations and too willing to just believe Wirecard's denials, and even of hindering the work of journalists who are trying to investigate the company.
So it sounds like they were kind of asleep at the wheel while this massive fraud was taking place right under their noses.
Yeah, there's definitely a sense that they could have and should have done more. The scandal led to, a lot of calls for reforms, and there have been some changes to strengthen BaFin's powers and try to improve their oversight of financial institutions.
What about Ernst & Young, the auditors who signed off on Wirecard's accounts for years? Did they face any consequences for their role in all this?
Well, they've certainly faced a lot of scrutiny and a lot of reputational damage. They're facing lawsuits from investors who lost money, and there are a lot of ongoing investigations into their conduct.
It seems like everyone involved in this scandal, from the executives to the regulators to the auditors, they're all facing some kind of reckoning.
That's right. The Wirecard collapse triggered this wave of legal action, regulatory investigations, parliamentary inquiries, all aimed at trying to understand how this happened and who was responsible.
But beyond the legal and the regulatory fallout, there's also the human cost of this scandal, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. Thousands of Wirecard employees lost their jobs, investors saw their savings completely wiped out, and the reputation of Germany's entire financial sector took a major hit. It's a reminder that corporate fraud isn't this victimless crime. It has very real consequences for real people.
Yeah. It's a tragedy on multiple levels. So where do we go from here? How do we prevent another Wirecard from happening?
Well, it's a complex challenge, but there are definitely steps that can be taken. Strengthening regulatory oversight is key, giving regulators more resources and more independence to investigate potential wrongdoing.
So making sure they're not too cozy with the companies they're supposed to be overseeing.
Exactly. We also need to promote more transparency, requiring companies to be more open about their financial dealings and making it easier for whistleblowers to come forward, without fear of reprisal.
It seems like encouraging a culture of skepticism and accountability is important too. Don't just take things at face value. Ask questions. Dig deeper. And don't be afraid to challenge authority.
Yeah, I completely agree. We all have a role to play in trying to prevent this kind of fraud from happening again.
And we can't forget the role of investigative journalism in all of this. Dan McGrum and the Financial Times, they showed how powerful investigative journalism can be in, holding power to account.
Absolutely. Their work was absolutely instrumental in exposing Wirecard's fraud. And it's a reminder that a free and independent press is essential for, a healthy democracy and a fair financial system.
Well said. This has been a fascinating, if somewhat unsettling, deep dive. The Wirecard scandal is a real cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked greed, the importance of transparency and accountability, and the power of investigative journalism to shine a light on wrongdoing.
Yeah, it's a story that really reminds us to be vigilant, to ask questions, and to never take anything for granted, especially when it comes to, our financial systems.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this journey through the twists and turns of the Wirecard scandal. We'll continue to follow this story as it unfolds and keep you updated on any new developments. Until then, stay informed, stay curious, and stay skeptical.